Good morning. I'm Carrie Shane Davis Zimmerman. I didn't get around to all the tables, but thank you for making the trek up here this morning. I just drove from Maple Grove, started out in the dark. We really need to change the time fast because leaving at 7 a.m. feels like it's 11 p.m. Anybody with me? It's not good. Okay, so we've got a PowerPoint up here. For those of you who don't yet know this, there is a very important handout that's going to track along with this PowerPoint, and it's actually in your folder. I will make a brief little caveat. It never turns out as clear as I would like it to turn out. So I apologize for that. I can only kill so many trees. So it's a 4-page handout, but it is going to track along with that. Let me say a few more things about myself and actually why I came up with this Theology Day. I live in Maple Grove with my husband Ben and our 3 children. Sarah's 10, Catherine's 9, James is 7. None of that was intentionally planned. And I left the house in a chaotic state this morning, so I'm actually very happy to be with all of you because you don't want to do 5th grade math homework with me. You don't want to do geometry or any of that good stuff. So it's really an honor to do this. I actually did my first Theology Day last year, and when Grace asked me to do it, she said, well, how about the topic of divorce and annulment? And I thought, well, why do I get the Debbie Downer topic for my first Theology Day? I really enjoyed that, actually. And I think that's because I'm a theologian that definitely tries to be present in the church, but also challenge the church. I try to see the church not as an institution, but as a group of people that really are human and are trying to find their way in this game called life, or this journey called life, right? I've been at St. Ben's, that's where I'm housed since 2004. And most of my courses are primarily to the undergraduates. I teach the intro course that's required in our curriculum. And then I do this course called Family, Church, and Society, which helps juniors and seniors wade through some fun topics like marriage, divorce, premarital sex, contraception, all of those fun, nonchalant topics in the Catholic Church, right? So when I did the Theology Day last spring, for those of you who are here, I definitely felt like I could have followed that presentation with a Theology Day on the 1960s. So much of what we ended up talking about was this decade of the 60s, and so much that was sort of hovering around us as we were trying to wade through both an understanding of civil divorce and the annulment process in the church really begged some questions about marriage and family over time. And I'm just going to I'm just going to name the elephant in the room well, I think there's one big elephant. You might think there's several. 2018, specifically this past July 2018, was the 50th anniversary of quite an interesting document, Humanae Vitae, right? And here's the thing. There was no way I was going to do a Theology Day that said Humanae Vitae. I wasn't going to go there. Because again, I'm somebody that wants to deal with the controversy, wants to deal with the issues of non-reception, wants to confront the hard realities, but I'm also going to be somebody that also wants to paint a picture of hope, especially in the midst of this secular society that we're living in. So I'm always seeking to do a balance. So I actually said to Grace, I said, well, listen, the elephant in the room is Humanae Vitae 50 years, but really Humanae Vitae is about marriage and family. So what if we try to do something that says 50 years on the family, a look back in order to understand the present? I will also admit that Pope Francis worked in my favor by penning Amoris Laetitia in 2016, his document, The Joy of Love, because that talks about marriage and family. So when I sat down to think about what it is that I actually want to do with you this morning, I thought, well, I want to go back in time, right? But I also want to end basically around 2016 with Amoris, right? And showing really what Francis is up to, because I think we're finally moving in quite an interesting direction, while at the same time holding up tradition, right? So I kind of do a song and dance. I will be very attentive to the needs that we have to break, and you always want a coffee refill and food refill. I'm always able to be interrupted, so if there's something I need to repeat, or if there's a question that you have, just shoot up your hand, and I will do my best to pay attention to you. This thing's driving me crazy. I'm just going to admit it now, but it's okay. I'll live with it. But I see that light, and it's kind of interesting. Where's my, here it is. Okay, so a little bit of background. Let me say a few more things. Again, if I had to say it in more academic terms, I'm somebody that's going to want to point out to you the general principles. What are the important things the church is trying to say about marriage and family? What is the good behind the tradition? Another way of saying that. And yet, I also want to get on the table the pastoral realities. Now, for some of you in the room, you're going to laugh at this. I've only been married 15 years, so that's like peons compared to what some people in this room have been doing most of their life. So I honor you. I want to hear those stories. I want to hear the pastoral realities. There's also people in this room that have made a professed monastic vow. I want to hear about that and your stories about what that means for marriage and family. And I'm also going to admit that I'm white, heterosexual, and biased, right? I'm upper middle class. I don't have the full portrait of marriage and family. And one of the things I like to strive to do as a moral theologian is consistently admit my biases, consistently admit where I might be lacking. Well, I know I'm lacking. It's not a might. Where I know I'm lacking in perspective. And I would also ask us to do something while we're thinking about this. It's weighing very heavily on my heart right now that there are broken, split apart families caravanning right now from Central America. And I cannot imagine, as a mother, my child being pulled away from me. I would absolutely scream, do everything. So as we get this wonderful privilege to be here and study theology further, I would really like us to hold up in our hearts and our minds what some people are doing right now as they're trying to walk and flee violence, flee gangs, flee sexual assault, flee rape, all of that stuff. Basically, flee situations in which their families are absolutely destroyed. So what else? I'm going to move this presentation this morning in 3 parts. Just like I would do in a classroom, I'm going to hit you hard first with the academic stuff, right? So part 1, I want to walk you through some of the highlights of Vatican teaching on marriage and family. And I'll explain more about that, right? And then we'll take a break, because you'll need a break, honestly. And then I'm going to jump into the pastoral realities. I'm going to use one example coming from Lisa Cahill. She's a moral theologian. She was my teacher. She is just a profound woman. She teaches at Boston College. She's now in her early 70s and just still can write a piece and knock it out of the park and really do that dance of 1 foot in, 1 foot out, respecting the tradition, respecting the institution, but also calling for change in a way that I think it does it in a respectful manner. And then I will always try to end by asking you, what are our takeaways? What are our lessons? What do we need to be thinking about further? So I definitely, I will start out a little bit in lecture style and going through things, just so we can get a common base. But then, in my mind, you need to start chiming in as we go into part 2 and 3. The other thing that I'm trying to do, acknowledge, got smushed, sorry. Yes.
You said that, Doctor, that you see the church not as an institution, but as a group of people. Give me a little explanation. What's the difference?
I think lots of times that we can get lost in the hierarchy, lost in rules, obligations. And what I want us to remember is at the end of the day, we are all participating in this journey towards walking to God. And so I'd like to take some focus off of the church as this institution and we have no say, right? We are the church, right? And the church is made up of various parts, right? But to me, when I look out, you're the church in my eyes, right? I see human beings in front of me, human beings that have walked a particular path of life because you've made choices, you've been guided by your own reasoning and thought process, and that's front and center for me as I think about 50 years on the family, right? So as you can see, what I'm always striving to do in a presentation is I'm trying to balance that the church has had many good things to say about marriage and family. That has been a guide to us. One of the things I'll stress about with Pope Francis is that his job is actually difficult, right? And here's the thing, what I like about what Francis is doing is he is trying to say, listen, we do have these aims. We do have these goals. I never stand up in front of my students and say, let's not have marriage as a goal. But what exactly we mean by marriage and the rules that go along with it, that's where the tweaking can come in. I'm not saying things like ditch commitment, go for divorce, do whatever you want. I don't say those kinds of things, right? I think what Francis does a really good job of is saying there are pastoral realities that we need to confront, and we need to wade through what those pastoral realities might mean, all the while holding up a goal, right? The goal is to raise and make strong families. Now, just when I say that, there's a part of me that says, wow, what does that mean, right? Because here's the thing, we also live in somewhat of a broken state. We are in need of God's saving power. We are in need of the Eucharist. I think the easiest example I can point to when we were doing the divorce and annulment piece is that so many people came to that presentation saying, I experienced divorce not because I wanted it, but because it was thrown on me, and I need the Eucharist. I need to not be banned from the Eucharist, right? So that's kind of a little bit of how I seek to balance, listen, and acknowledge people on the ground. I frankly think that's what Francis is trying to do. And when we get to Amoris, I'm going to point to you in different ways how he's doing the balancing, the listening, and the acknowledging. And really it's 1 foot in the tradition, 1 foot out, but I don't want you to think that means we just throw the baby out with the bathwater. You can't really go that route in my mind, right? I think the other thing I want you to see working throughout this presentation is that when the church thinks about marriage and family, it's going to draw upon Scripture. I'm going to be honest with you, it's not that is not problematic, right? Scripture has a particular content. We need to remember that. If I could meet one person when I go to wherever I'm going, once I pass away, it's going to be John Paul II, right? I'm going to have the knockdown drag out with him about his interpretation of Genesis, right? But Scripture is important. It's a guide for us, right? People's experience matters. Again, that's not without issues and problems, right? People's feelings and experiences can lead them astray, right? We all know that. Part of the moral life and the challenge of the moral life is balancing things, right? Last but not least, we have been given reasoning power, right? We are rational beings, right? But again, there's lots of times where our feelings can trump our reasoning, especially when it comes to very hurtful pathways. Think of, again, something like divorce, right? And we need to balance those things. So I want you to see in this presentation the church trying to bring in scripture, bring in experience, and bring in reasoning power, right? So if you want to get your handouts out, this would be a time where I spent more time giving you the slides about the official teaching, right? So here we go. I actually apologize. I wanted to make this handout just one big slide for you, but I'm going to walk you through this really key, this slide, because to me it's important, because this really shows our 50-year timeline that we're dealing with, right? It's going to start with the Second Vatican Council, right? I mean, everything gets going thanks to John the 23rd, right? So amen, Jesus, right? So you've got Church in the Modern World being written in 1964. You've got Joy and Hope, famously known as Gaudium et Spes, in 1965, right? So those two documents, Lumen Gentium and Gaudium et Spes, are really your heavy hitters as far as documents are concerned when it comes to the topic of marriage and family. That's where scholars consistently go back to those two documents. The reason we go back to Lumen Gentium and Gaudium et Spes is because what John Paul II really does is continue the path of Vatican II. Now, some people would argue he doesn't continue it enough. He takes some curves along the way. We'll get to that, right? But what St. Pope John Paul II does is in 1980, he calls for a synod in Rome to address the issues of marriage and family. And from that synod, what gets penned is his encyclical Familiaris Consortio, his letter to families, right? And that gets written in 1981. We really see the church being quiet somewhat on issues of marriage and family throughout the remainder of John Paul II's pontificate, because of course he's going to pass away in 2005. Benedict is going to come along and he's going to be Pope, and Benedict is not necessarily going to take up issues of marriage and family. And part of the reason why that becomes the case is because what John Paul does after Familiaris Consortio is not actually write another encyclical on marriage and family. He starts doing radio addresses. And those radio addresses get compiled into a compendium which will eventually be called Theology of the Body, right? So John Paul doesn't write much more about families, right? It's all being taught through this venue of his Theology of the Body. So we actually don't get a particular focus again on marriage and the family until Francis comes on the scene and calls for his synods, right? Both in 2015 and 2016. There's a first session in October 2014 that you might have heard about, and then there's a second session in October 2015. And I kind of joke because talk about the academy and theologians like going in a tizzy, starting in about 2012 when the rumor started. He's going to do it. He's going to call something like, this is going to happen. Everything's going to get overturned. Divorce is going to be settled. Homosexuality is going to be settled. Oh, okay, it was a tizzy, right? And the media coverage was quite interesting, right? Theologians waited not patiently for the final report that came out in October 2016. And again, I'm going to talk some about where we really went astray in our media coverage with these synods, right? Because it so much became about the issue of divorce, the issue of remarriage. And I'm here to tell you, that is certainly a crucial issue, But there's a lot more good stuff that like we are missing in that final report and what will eventually become Amoris Laetitia, right? So The Joy of Love comes out in March 2016. I got to tell you, when I read that, I think to myself, you could have said this a lot faster. This is way too long. Like, you're killing me here. Like, we're already on paragraph 200. But actually, the title says it all. The Joy of Love. And reading through that in preparation for this presentation, I think to myself, Francis has really nailed it. He has nailed bringing back this concept of joy, and we'll talk more about that soon. But this is what I want to do with you, right? This, to me, is your important 50-year timeline. And yes, Humanae Vitae is missing from that, right? And that's because I don't want us to get too distracted. Humanae Vitae will lay down two key concepts for marriage and family: the concept of married love and the concept of responsible parenthood. The reason I never want to focus solely on Humanae Vitae is because Pope Paul VI had to do something very, very quickly. That is a very short encyclical trying to go in and respond to the fact that by 1960 and finally 1968, what had come on the scene in America? Your birth control pill, right? And many, many Catholics were taking the birth control pill. And so we will get to that issue, I promise you, but I really need you to walk away here and see goodness, right? No matter where you are at on the spectrum, I need you to see the church's honest, genuine attempt to show us what's possible, right? And so let's get started with that, right? So Vatican II, right? Again, I could have made this whole entire presentation actually about Vatican II. There are 6 important documents that will talk about marriage and family, but again, your 2 big ones that spend the most time talking about marriage and family are Lumen Gentium in 1964 and Gaudium et Spes, right? What I'm going to show you in the next slide is how we start building a concept of what we're going to call marriage and family, right? So here are some important ideas that are put forth, right? In the document, the Declaration on Christian Education, there is a big emphasis on parents, right? And that really, when it comes to marriage and family, parents play a pivotal role in evangelizing and also preparing that family to be the vision that the church would like that family to be. So here's some key points. Parents are the primary educators of their children, right? And the decree on the apostolate of lay people, it is the first time you hear this key phrase that actually John Paul II will reiterate over and over and over again. Family is the first vital cell of society. That phrase has so much punch to it to say this is where it all begins. You learn who you are, a child of God, in your family. Now, some people don't learn that, right? You learn so many things from watching the 2 people that are in your family leading it, right? Okay, now I'm just going to name the other elephant in the room, right? Our concept of family has changed, right? If we have the 1950s nuclear family, ideas about family are changing. Many theologians have spoken about, shouldn't we say families instead of family? Because if we admit that not all families look the same way, what does that mean for us, right? This is that issue of, I think a crass way to put it is, well, here's the family and here's the broken families, right? I want to be really careful to not use that word broken, right? It's probably because I actually come from a broken family. My parents got divorced, and my mom was a single mom the first 2 years of her life. And my mom in 1974, after I was born, felt so compelled to find a husband to be validated, right? Even though nobody would admit that my biological father cheated on her and left her pregnant with me, and she raised me for the first 2 years alone. So there's issues here, and I will admit, I have really strong biases when you lay out a term, a family could be broken, right? I think that's a little bit harsh to lay on people that don't always have a choice, right? But there's power behind this punch, right? That family is the first vital cell of society. John Paul will pick up this notion and say, you don't get it right here, you are actually not going to get it right going out into the world at all, right? What else? Lumen Gentium will take it a step further and I think add another interesting punch to this concept of marriage and family. And that is this: family is the domestic church, right? Family is, again, where it all starts, right? And I think one of the hard things, and I was thinking about this because Lisa Cahill reminded me of this when I was, again, preparing for this. We kind of have to be careful to not confuse marriage and family, right? What do I mean by that? We have a great way of describing the power behind family, right? But then what happens is we spend so much time talking about marriage and rules that go along with family that we kind of miss the ebb and the flow that comes from family. And I'll talk more about that. But you certainly have something going on as early as Vatican II, shifting this idea away from a nuclear family motto to saying, first vital cell of society, family is the domestic church, right? And when you start to improve your lingo, you're going to start to see the benefits of improving that lingo and talking beyond your 1950s model of your nuclear family, right? And I will say this, that model needed to happen, right? That's post-World War II. The 50s were, we could do another theology day on the 50s, right? Like, that's an interesting decade that we could look at, right? The world was recovering from World War II, as many of you know, right? That's interesting. It's interesting how we go from the 1950s to the 1960s. Did all hell break loose in the 1960s? Yeah, somehow. I don't know. You'd have to tell me, because I wasn't even conceived in the mind yet, right? Okay, what else? I want to go to Gaudium et Spes, right? Because I said to you, Gaudium et Spes was going to come in during Vatican II and really begin to lay the groundwork of how we would shift discussions on marriage and family, right? So Gaudium et Spes, first of all, is going to dedicate 6 chapters to the idea of marriage and family. And this sounds kind of corny, but like there are people that like sit around and like count the number of times certain words will appear in encyclicals. And the fact that Gaudium et Spes, church in the modern world, right, was going to try to spend 6 articles talking about marriage and the family kind of like made everybody pause and say, oh, this must be an important concept because the church is talking about it for 6 entire paragraphs, right? And here's the thing. What Gaudium et Spes will try to do is raise this concept that the family is deserving of dignity, right? Everything should be done to protect the family. I can't stress to you enough what that could possibly mean for the social economic order, right? if we truly protected the family, here's one example. We would not be having arguments about maternity and paternity leave. If we truly understood the vitality and dignity of the family, we would be saying to parents, oh, absolutely, you should have maternity and paternity leave. Absolutely, you should have health care. Absolutely, you should have these basic needs, right? So the dignity of marriage and family, that idea gets reinforced. And what's interesting is that that idea is actually being picked up from Pius XI's 1930 encyclical on human marriage. I mean, that reads like you would need a whole, a whole carafe of coffee to read that one, right? That's pretty like, well, this is written in 1930, I can tell, right? But this idea comes in about the dignity, and what Gaudium at Spes will add in is this concept of love, right? Love should be a part of marriage and family. Now, the hard part is, I think that idea of love and joy that marriage and family bring gets a little bit pushed to the side when Humanae Vitae comes out and talks about married love, because that ends up only being described as conjugal love and the sexual act, and it must be unitive and procreative each and every time. Okay, love and sex do go hand in hand, right? But there's probably many people in this room that are not having sex and they're still in love, and it's all okay, right? Like, you can't lose the concept of what love and joy mean. And unfortunately, even though you have something being really good written in 64 and 65, everybody goes for the jugular when Humanae Vitae comes out and says, well, is it all about conjugal love? Yes, a lot of the focus goes right there, right? What else? I think I stepped on something, Grace. I don't know what I did. Okay, let's jump to 1981 and John Paul II, because I know I'm being academic and going off on my little tangents, and I apologize. This is a great quote. This sums up John Paul II and Familiaris Consortio in a nutshell. As the family goes, so goes the nation, and so goes the world, the whole world in which we live, right? Okay, part of the reason why I want to meet John Paul II is very difficult childhood. Anybody know what happened to him as a child? Who did he lose? He lost his mother very early on, and he was raised by his father. He actually spent time in a concentration camp. I'm amazingly impressed for not having the presence of a mother in his life. How graciously John Paul articulates the role of the female and the role of motherhood. Do I think it's all perfect? No. But you actually have a pope really bringing forward the role of the mother in a family and what that particularly means. Again, it's not without its drawbacks. He needs to talk way more about fatherhood. He doesn't. He focuses very much on motherhood. But one of the things pushing John Paul II forward in his thinking about theology of the body and marriage and family is, again, this concept that if you don't get right marriage and family and the important role of parents, everything that flows out of that family will actually be in disarray. And that's why he's going to say something like, if you don't get the family right, the nation isn't right, and the world isn't right. Now, that's going to be difficult for us to handle in 2018 as we, I think, gain understanding psychologically, socially, culturally, about, well, what if hard times are inflicted on your family? Like, I want to say to John Paul, okay, is your notion of marriage and family so idealistic that it can't account for the real life on the ground scenarios of people? I can already tell you he's going to say to me, no, it's not too idealistic. You just need to get your butt in order, right? And then we'll go round and round. It's why I want to talk to him, right? Okay, a slide with a lot of stuff, so I apologize, and it is on your thing. What does John Paul II do? Well, he's no fool. He's going to pick up on this notion of dignity and love that comes from Vatican II, right? Because here's the thing. No pope wants to actually reinvent the wheel, right? So, like, go back in time and look at what the key ideas were. So the idea of dignity, right? I just want you to sit back and pause and, like, feel the power, and I always say the punch of these lines, right, about that vision of marriage and family. John Paul will say immediately at the start in Familiaris Consortio in paragraph 5, the entire truth and full dignity of marriage and family must be understood. Now, again, we rub against that because for him, the entire truth and full dignity, it is going to be the heterosexual norm, right? And those that don't fit that heterosexual norm are going to brush up against it and say, what do you mean? What do you mean the entire truth? What if my truth is that my partner left me? What does that mean for me, right? He talks about the phrase, the lofty dignity of marriage, right? The dignity and responsibility of the Christian family as domestic church. What he's doing is he's repeating Vatican II, right? The role of love. The family is founded and given by love. John Paul will talk so much about this Trinitarian image of the family. The family participates in love just like the Trinity participates in an analogy of love, right? The family forms this community of persons, right? And what the family's job, number one job, is to bring about everybody's authentic self, right? In that community of persons. And last but not least, he'll say the family is an intimate community of life and love willed by God. That is because pumping through John Paul II's veins is this very high notion of the family that's coming out of his reading of Genesis 1 and 2, and the power behind God's creation of man and woman and family and so on and so forth. Again, another side note, that could be a whole theology day of how does John Paul II interpret Scripture? What does that mean? For me, I can argue with him, but I got to tell you, there's something powerful about what he believes is possible for a human being. It's complicated, it's not without issues, but it's fascinating stuff to read, right? What else about Familiaris Consortio? Okay, here comes the birth control contraception stuff that everybody's waiting for, right? So here's the thing. In a nutshell, there was no way that John Paul was going to go against Paul VI and Humanae Vitae. Part of the reason that is the case is because the major thinking that influenced Paul VI in writing Humanae Vitae and trying to begin to write about the person's responsibility when it came to the unitive and procreative ends of the sexual act is because John Paul was basically behind the scenes helping Paul VI understand what was at stake with the birth control movement and what we needed to understand about the conjugal act and its unitive and its procreative end. He was doing that, though, as Bishop of Krakow, right? And so John Paul is highly philosophical in how he looks at the human person and how he would look at something like the conjugal act, the act of sex, having those two ends of the unitive end, it's meant to bring the couple together, and also the procreative end, right? So what he's going to do in Familiaris Consortio is he's going to reiterate the command given in Humanae Vitae, right, that the love between husband and wife has to be open to new life, right? The key development, though, is he is not going to go down the road that Paul VI went, which is arguing from a biological point of view, right? A physicalist point of view, only thinking about the act, right? And John Paul wants to convince you, beginning in Familiaris Consortio, that your body is a language that you speak to your spouse. And that was why part of the phrase will develop, theology of the body, right? And what he will do is he will give new reasons as to why a couple, a husband and a wife, need to not go the route of choosing a form of artificial contraception, right? They need to go the route of natural family planning, right? Why? Well, he's going to lay down a hammer in Familiaris Consortio, paragraph number 37. He's going to argue, and this is strong language. Contraception, choosing a mode of artificial contraception, separating those ends of the unitive and procreative, falsifies the nuptial meaning of the body. It's a false sign of what the body is actually supposed to do. Okay, now take a deep breath, right? That could be another theology day. John Paul II's theology of the body. What is it? How does it work? Blah, 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 right? But again, I promised you I would bring in bits and pieces of this. Don't forget the other two slides. Dignity, love, the good stuff, right? And of course, what everybody did when Familiaris Consortio came out is they went right to this stuff, right? What is he saying? What is he going to say about contraception and birth control, right? I will say that many people have found theology of the body very powerful once they learn about it, but interesting enough. All right, that was 45 minutes of me yakking, right? Let's pause for a second, right? Let's pause because what you know is this. You know Vatican II laid groundwork for us to envision the family and the marriage act as something sacred, right? And more importantly, the family as having this potential to move society along, right? That vision of the family, though, is heterosexual. It does involve a mother and a father. And what begins to really creep in post-Vatican II is, again, what happens to you personally when your family experiences, see, I don't want to use brokenness, experiences challenges, right? And you are no longer that supposed model that the church is putting forth in your mind. What we see is, despite the societal changes on the ground, I'm thinking 60s and 70s, right? The challenges by secular society. By the 1980s, John Paul is coming along and saying, no, we must remember the dignity of the family. And if we got that straight, we would not have the problems that we have. We would not have divorce rates skyrocketing in the 1980s. We would not have this interesting period of time right now where, I'll be honest with you, I teach a lot of students that think, why would I ever want to get married? Why? Shouldn't I just cohabit? Shouldn't I just have this be temporary, right? And what my students are doing, right? Like, I'm in the middle. I'm putting you at Vatican II. I'm putting myself John Paul II, 1990s era, right? I haven't fallen off the bandwagon. I choose to get married, right? Basically because my husband and I think that our grandmothers are going to rise up in the grave and kill us if we don't, right? So, I mean, we're no fools, right? Like, we're going to Cannon Falls, and we are going to St. Pius V, and we're getting the sacrament, and we're not bucking the trend, right? But I look around at my students, and I got to begin to sell marriage and family again with a whole new set of problems that are now on my horizon, right? So, initial thoughts, because I do want to get you to the bathroom or a refresher in about 5 minutes. Initial thoughts, comments, ideas.
I recall probably the first part of the 60s, being at the Newman Center at Mankato State, and Father Paul Halloran was there, and he said, "Please do not judge my friend Bishop James Shannon." He directed someone in the confessional who was at her wit's end and could not have any more children. And he told her, use birth control then. He left the church. It was a travesty that he did.
The bishop left the church.
He was, I don't know, I think, was he auxiliary bishop or was he bishop? He was head of the St. Thomas College as well. But anyway, way back then, and I remember that so starkly that we were told not to judge him by one of his priestly friends.
I'll say two quick things. We're going to get to Pope Francis and Amoris, and wow, he's going to really leave things vague, right? Francis's mindset is, at the end of the day, the church holds out an ideal, and you have your discernment and your conversations with your spouse, and frankly with God, right? At the end of the day, it is you and your own moral conscience. And that's quite interesting. The other thing I would say really quickly is Cahill will drive home this point that we need to stop judging. We need to start becoming overly empathetic for our lack of empathy. And when you're empathetic, it doesn't mean that you would throw the baby out with the bathwater. You would empathize with someone's situation and help move them along to living the best moral life that they can in their circumstances, right? But you don't slam the door, right? Go ahead.
We have two wonderful daughters in very good relationships with young men. And so what you just said a minute ago just resonates with my wife Vicki and I. And yet, there's no talk of marriage. There's seemingly a committed relationship. And so we're trying to be, as you just said, very empathetic towards the beautiful relationship that seems very loving, but also thinking that mom and dad's marriage is showing hopefully something that is very, very loving and godly. And so I just wanted to put an asterisk or put an exclamation point on a couple of elements that you mentioned.
Yeah, I have a brand new challenge ahead of me in my sexual ethics courses of just what is commitment, right? And what does it mean to work through, frankly, being ticked off at your spouse, right? What does this thing called marriage mean? Right? And unfortunately, I think so much of our talk has been about the rules regarding sexuality, right? And part of the reason why I wanted to show you this Theology Day was like Amoris is putting us back on track to the joy of love, right? Yes, there's critiques. He didn't mention a lot of things that I needed him to mention, but in some ways, I can see why Francis went back to the well to get some joy when it comes to marriage and family. And I've got to package that now in a way that I begin to tell my 20-somethings this, I don't know, are they post-millennials? I don't even know what the heck they are anymore. I now feel officially old at 44. They are lost. They are lost. They are lonely. They are frustrated. They are hurt. And what does the new package need to look like for them to begin to build their trust in this thing called marriage and family? And I think they're worried because a lot of their friends, frankly, will not fit the heterosexual male-female model. And what does that mean for us, right? Because they are empathetic and loving to the people that don't fit that model. And they are kind of putting their feet, digging their feet in and saying, well, if you don't let them in, I'm not coming over here, right? Now, we can argue about whether or not that's the best path, right? But to ignore that that is happening would be foolish of us, right? We've got to hear their concerns and wrestle with what it means for them and for us and how we're going to get back to a point of joy, right? Okay, I'm aware of time. How about we do a coffee bathroom break, and then we're going to get to the punch of Lisa Cahill. A-okay? Part 2? Okay. Yep, 10 minutes. How's that sound? Does that work for everybody? Okay.
Just give us the answers.
That's what my students want.
Yeah.
Okay, as I sort of pull you back together, I actually realized I have a little bit more teaching to do, so I'm going to do it in like 15 minutes, okay? So bear with me. So I want you to see up here and also in your handout, we've got an interesting leap of time. If we leave John Paul II in the 1980s and 1990s, remember he's Pope from 1978 to 2005. We have Benedict here from 2005 to 2013. I'm sorry, if I need to make that in white so you can see it better. Really, we're after Familiaris Consortio in 1981 and the sort of different way in which theology of the body gets promulgated through radio addresses versus that encyclical route, we're pretty quiet on the home front back at the Vatican here as far as pens writing, right? And yet, here's the thing. There's a lot that's happening in the social order, right? The change that is on the ground in the 80s, the 90s, the new millennium. Is anybody with me that it's 2018? How is that possible, right? Like, what are we going to call ourselves next? I really stress about that. Changes in the social order. I've got my ideas of what that means. Oh, I can only imagine what you think that means, and I'm excited for that in just a little bit. Let's get and jump to 2015. Let's go through this final report that Francis pens and begin to see what I hinted at earlier, which is, I think, a little bit of a change of pathway and getting us to remember the joy. So this final report in 2015, after these two synods in 13 and 14, right? We see echoes of both Familiaris Consortio and Vatican II in both language and content, right? So here are some examples. The family is still going to be referred to as a domestic church. Marriage is still going to be referred to as this intimate communion of persons, and that's meant to intentionally mimic what is going on within the Trinity, so like the dignity of that marriage. And then there's also that talk again about the language and dignity of love used from Gaudium at Spes. Somebody very wise in this audience came up to me during the break, and this is where, like, I should have said this and made it painfully obvious. Here's the thing. We're not talking about secular marriage. Go to the courthouse, right? We are talking about the sacrament of marriage. And if anybody in this room has received the sacrament of marriage, you know Protestants are looking at us like, why have you made this a sacrament? What are you people doing, right? And then the running joke on the ground is, are you going to a Protestant wedding or a Catholic wedding? Because you know if you're going to a Catholic wedding, you are not getting to the reception anytime soon. It is going to be a full-fledged mass. Lots is going to happen. And if you're going to your Protestant friend's wedding, you're going to get there a lot faster, right? It's just the way it is. So, I mean, that is something that's really... that's like a fifth elephant in the room, right? We're talking about a very particular understanding of marriage. Besides just being heterosexual, we're talking about marriage as a sacrament, and that's a big gun issue, so to speak, right? The thing that Francis will begin to add in is this concept about the beauty of marriage and family life. And that's because... if you had time to start reading Francis's documents and going to every single footnote, right? Francis, when he writes, draws from a wide array of sources, right? He's actually going to go down in history as this fun little fun fact for Trivial Pursuit. You could remember this. He is going to be the first pontificate in an encyclical to actually quote a film. He quotes Babette's Feast in The Joy of Love, Amoris. No pope has ever done that before. So this guy is wide-ranging, right, when it comes to sources. But he's going to add in this concept of beauty, makes sense. He's going to really hone in on this concept of love. What else is going to happen? What Francis begins to do in this final report is say, well, there's been some interesting changes on the ground. He praises social media's ability to actually unite families across geographic boundaries, right? But he is also going to name just a few things that are slightly problematic in our world today. The sale of embryos, the sexual abuse of minors. Pause on that one. That's another theology day, right? And of course, what was also, if we are acknowledging this humane vitae elephant in the room, the twist that Francis will begin to insert in this final report and in Amoris is this. He is not going to repeat the command of Paul VI that each and every marriage act must remain open to life. Now, let me be clear. Just because he does not repeat it word for word from Paul VI does not mean it's not there, right? And this is the interesting thing that Francis does, right? He leaves things vague, right? Francis wants to leave things vague, I think, because he wants to move the discussion about how to handle the challenges and the pastoral realities. He wants to move it from the Vatican institutional level to the pew level, right? Get the people in the pew with their priest and their bishop talking and addressing the challenges. Don't run to the Vatican to deal with everything, right? What else? The final report. So there is this specific section on our generative responsibility. There's no discussion about which methods could be used if a couple judged a pregnancy at this time to be irresponsible. What Francis will do with Humanae Vitae is basically piggyback on this notion of what responsible parenthood means. In Humanae Vitae, responsible parenthood means making tough decisions about whether or not to have a child again, having that discernment process, right? Again, Francis is not going to say, well, this method is out when you decide no more. This method is out, right? Clearly in Humanae Vitae, you had Paul VI saying there is a big moral difference between the use of an artificial contraceptive and natural family planning, right? It's a moral formation difference, right? The person, it will be said in Humanae Vitae that the person that is open to natural family planning is respecting God's order, and the person that is not choosing the path of natural family planning is going against God's order. Again, you can hear the language, you can hear words of like brokenness, so on and so forth, right? Francis isn't going there in the final report, right? Divorce. What is Francis also not doing in this final report? And this made people go in a tizzy because, again, what does he mean? What is he really trying to say? He's not going to repeat the ban that John Paul gave in Familiaris Consortio 84, that those civilly remarried cannot receive communion. And again, what Francis is going to nail home in Amoris Laetitia is the concept of joy and the concept of what the Eucharist is meant to do for you. When you are in your most pain, the Eucharist is that healing power you need to bring you back. Now again, that's not without, it's not a perfect path, right? Because again, we're talking about the sacrament of marriage. There is supposed to be a specific process you're supposed to follow for divorce, annulment, so on and so forth. But Francis doesn't repeat that ban that if you're civilly remarried without an annulment, you cannot receive the Eucharist. Again, it's hard for anyone reading this to figure out, well, what does that mean? Just tell us what to do, right? Okay, he's not repeating the ban, but that doesn't mean Francis wants you to just go out and do whatever the hell you want, right? Like, that's the rub that is in Francis's writings, right? He is somewhat raked over the coals in this final report that he doesn't talk about overpopulation. He stays far away from addressing the issue of complementarity of the spouses. That would force him to go down the road of addressing things like homosexuality, the conjugal act, the act of sex and love. And like I said, he's not touching homosexual unions with a 10-foot pole in this final report, right? And again, what does that mean? There are many people that remain frustrated that those topics were not addressed in the final report, right? What else? Let's get to Amoris and see our major themes, right? So like I said, Amoris comes out in your 10th theology day could be just a theology day wading through Amoris because it is so long. But I have to tell you, Francis's passion and his pastoral sense of being empathetic, non-judgmental, and bringing home this idea of mercy just shines through in this document. If you have a chance to get it, download it, read it all, right? My colleague Julie Rubio has a nice, I might have actually put it out there. My colleague Julie Rubio has a nice, short, condensed reading guide that you could use to go along with it because it's really something beautiful that you could suggest you do in your parishes, right? So Amoris Laetitia, some major themes are these idea of sources. Again, Francis is going to draw from all over when he talks about the nature of marriage and love. He's going to talk about the nature of love. He's going to talk about responsible parenthood. He's going to talk about marriage counseling and spirituality. And he's also going to address divorce and marriage. But again, what I want to stress in Amoris is that all of these major themes are sitting in a basket called joy, right? Calling you back to the joy of love, the joy that can come from marriage, the joy that can come from your family. Tony, you have a quick question. Go ahead.
Do you consider Pope Francis quite successful? Because now there are some cardinals and bishops disagreeing with him and want to bring it up for debate.
Oh, wow, that's a good one, Tony. Yeah. I'll just say a quick yes and no. And the reason I'm going to say, I love to say yes and no. That lets me off the hook, right? Yes and no, because something that's also weighing on my mind is the clergy sexual abuse scandal. Like, I'm pretty ticked off. Like, I have friends, theologian friends that are leaving the church. So that was a bombshell that I just dropped on us, right? That is like bigger than an elephant. So I'm wrestling. I want a lot more done. I want to be Pope.
I keep going back to reading the New Testament and following what the apostles did and their behavior with Jesus. And there was argument, there was dissension,
Yeah.
there was these conversations. In learning, my husband always tells me, we become confused as we learn.
Right.
And I think we are very comfortable when we know black and white. But gray is very scary.
Yeah, gray is very scary, and yet that's actually the color of our life, right? If we really think about what our life is like, it's all gray, right? But let's throw some purple and yellow and green in there too. We have to be sunshine too, right? It's confusing on the ground. But you know, I would say as a moral theologian, we are always striving. We are striving to be in communion with God. We are striving to be in communion with each other. And we are wrestling day to day. I think what's hard is that if I could write an encyclical, I would want to balance the joy, and I would talk also about the struggles. And the hard part is we are searching for, tell us what to do. Right? Like, how do we move forward, right? And in some ways, I think we have to do a lot better job as a church of coming together and having the conversations and having the uncomfortable arguments back and forth. We might not even want to call them arguments. We can call it controversial dialogue with each other. I think something that we're not doing enough of is we go to church and then that's it. But there's a lot more we could be doing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, right? I mean, we should be having teach-ins like this. We should all be continuing our education. We shouldn't be dropped off at confirmation, right? Because actually where the church needs us the most and where we need the church the most is this continuing ed, right? We have to have these conversations, right? What I want to pay attention to in Amoris is the 7 characteristics that Francis will use to describe authentic love, right? And again, I want you to see all this sitting in a basket of joy, like seeing what we are called to, right? First, love opens our eyes to see, right? We have got to open our eyes to what is around us. What does that mean to open our eyes around us? Wow, that's a loaded question, right? Because I would say, yeah, open your eyes and see people committed. What does that mean? What do we do that it's not taking the particular form, right? But we see people opening their eyes to love. We have a young generation right now that wants to say back to us, love is love. And they will repeatedly say in their arguments to me, love is love, and it doesn't matter if you're loving a man or a woman, it's love. Okay, we have to confront that. We have to wrestle with it. We have to ask ourselves, what does that mean, right? Authentic love requires freedom, right? We have to, on the one hand, not compel young people to feel like they have to go down a particular road in order to have sex, yet at the same time, we have to help them understand context, structure, form, and meaning of what commitment is. It's a balancing act. What does authentic love and freedom mean in marriage and family? How does that play into gender roles? That's all the stuff that we have to talk about. How does that influence our sense of the socioeconomic order, right? Love always gives life. Okay, can we get to a point where gives life does not only mean natural family planning, does not only mean biological reproduction? You give somebody life when you give them food and shelter and clothing. Like, think outside the box. What could that possibly mean, right? Love challenges us to reveal our true selves, right? I think this is where we need to help the younger generation understand their true self, right? Our younger generation is very, very afraid of conflict because they see what can happen with conflict. Somebody pulls out a gun and shoots you if there's conflict. That's what they have seen since the time that they were born. Somebody's mad at you, they're going to kill you because they're mad at you. There's no negotiation, right? Conjugal love combines friendship and passion. That's very much a repeat of the best possible notion of conjugal love, right? It's about friendship and it's about erotic passion, right? The problem is all of that beautiful language gets lost when the conversation only becomes, are you using the pill? What are you doing, right? What does it mean to keep conjugal or combine friendship and passion in marriage and family? What are people's real on-the-ground experiences? Love involves lifelong sharing. Francis is at pains to help people understand that this thing called marriage and family is not something that's temporary. But again, our generation in front of us is missing a huge, vital skill, and that is the skill of controversial dialogue and the skill of being able to work through when things get difficult. What do you do? Their solution is you block somebody on a cell phone, you shut down Snapchat, you defriend them on Facebook. What you basically do when somebody disagrees with you is you block them, right? And you never have conversations with them about what it means to actually disagree, right? And last but not least, there is extreme joy when it comes to love. And what does that mean, right? When I was doing this, I was reading Gerald O'Collins. He's a Jesuit. I was reading his essay and how he was like unpacking Amoris, and I had to laugh because he said, notice that Francis did not call this encyclical the joy of sex. He called it the joy of love. And he was joking, thank God, because there is a book from the 1970s called The Joy of Sex, right? You probably have seen it, right? And I just thought, what? You know, I was born in 74, so I don't know, but I was like, joy of sex, like God help us, right? Like joy of love, right? So, again, we've got now a smattering of what Francis is pulling in for us. Now, you know, as a teacher, I'm like completely fretting here because I'm like, wow, like I need to tell you so much more about Vatican II. I need to like way expand on Familiaris Consortio. I need to teach you theology of the body. We basically need to meet weekly if you'd agree to that, right? Like, because I'm having agony over here, like, well, I forgot to tell you this, this, and this, but you're just going to have to deal, right? So before I move on to that second stage of our pastoral realities and things get interesting in here, any comments or questions about Francis or whatnot?
You alluded to something, I want to just build on that. When you were talking about the need for people to discern their own conscience, their own freedom, their spouse, and the church. You mentioned priests. It struck me that whoever we consider church, which I think is all of us, have a responsibility for the education that you talked about, ongoing education, because people don't know the kind of thing you're talking about and the freedom and the leeway that's there. And among those that need the education, I think, are priests. I know some people that are in parishes, and the order doesn't have to come from the Pope. It's already down in the parishes for some of the priests. So people really feel hamstrung, and that's enough to drive them away from the church.
I was having a few little chats with some people, and you're absolutely right. The education of priests is really in need of some tweaking, right? And they need ongoing education, right? It's not just, I don't think it's a one shot, I went to seminary and now it's all okay, right? Just even by a show of hands, how many have had their priests preach on Amoris? Okay, enough said. Somebody had it. Here.
Thank you. You have mentioned joy a number of times, and yet every person in this room has a different awareness of joy. Would you say a word about that, please? It's a learning experience, and with each, depending on our own experience. It has to do with rewards. It has to do with the reward of feeling joy, the seeking out of joy. So I just wanted to mention that.
I think you should do it. Okay, so this might seem weird, but I kind of want to pause because here's where I think you nailed it. We all have different experiences of joy, right? And whether or not you're feeling the joy of love in your marriage and family really highly depends on whether you feel validated as your authentic self, right? I'll use a personal example of how I think about this, right? I feel joy and love in my marriage because I have a partner, a husband, a spouse that looks at me this morning and says, knock him dead, right? Go get him. Because he gets what this does for me, right? And so he says, I'll take the kids to school for you, right? So you can get up early and get settled. Thank you. Okay, I'm out the door, right? That's a joy and love and marriage for me because, okay, bombshell, I'm not getting trapped by a gender role, right? My husband sees my vocational calling in me, right? And says, we need to do whatever it takes so you can keep doing this, right? And that meant daycare, and that meant this, this, and this. So part of the reason why I want to pause is because when I get to part 2 and I ask you to name the pastoral realities and the challenges we're facing in marriage and family, I think you're absolutely right. The joy is different if you're not getting support and able to live out your authentic self in your marriage and in your family, right? Here's your next bombshell. If you are gay or lesbian, or, okay, let's throw transgender in there, FYI, another theology day we have to deal with. What does that mean, right? How are you your authentic self up against what the church has envisioned for you? What if some of you in this room have a child who's gay or lesbian or transgender? What does that mean for your family? All of these are going to play a role, I think, in whether or not you feel joy because of your marriage or family, or this other word we never talk about, and that is the shame that we have been made to feel because we have experiences that don't line up. I'm totally trying to avoid broken, right? Because, damn it, I am not going down the broken road, right? We are real human beings that cannot be shamed into not remembering we're all children of God. Oh my God, that was a rant.
Carrie, I
Sorry.
have a mic here.
You do? Oh, thank you. Sorry. Thank you. Stop me. Go ahead.
I also am pissed at the priests and all of this stuff that's happening now. Ticked off with the church a little bit. But I didn't want to leave the church. I would like the church to change. And St. Francis, it seems like he's going, as you said, in a little bit different direction. But what I did is I went into a spirituality class. And this class makes you think of your relationship between you and God. It's based on American Indian, Christianity, and some of the thinking that's going on. And it also, in total, some things that you have here is in knowing yourself, trying to know yourself, get your ego out of your process, and instead live on a higher thought.
Yep.
It's sort of interesting what's been going on for some time now, and we've trusted in each other enough now to say personal things,
Right.
which means we have even more insight into what we're experiencing.
Right.
But I highly suggest something of that to any of you. You can. It's just refreshing.
Sure.
It's a different way of thinking. And I'm also going into a Bible study class given out by St. Augustine's. So I'm attacking in two different portions.
Yep.
But I certainly wish the church would clean up its act a little bit.
Right. Can you go in the back to her, and then can I just get her, because I haven't heard her voice.
I'm just wondering if we're seeing any movement. If we truly are the church, and if Pope Francis wants to hear discussion from the pews, not just go to the Vatican immediately, I think besides what that lady just said is we need major changes in the church. And one of them, I think, needs to be that all of us need to become more active. And does the hierarchy of the church acknowledge that, yes, we are the church, and that lay people need to be involved in any of the discussions of what happens if a priest is accused of abuse, sexual abuse. They have proven over and over and over and over again that they cannot police themselves.
Right.
We need to be part of that discussion. We need to be part of that solution. And are we seeing any kind of movement towards that the hierarchy is actually saying that, yes, lay people are the church and we need to be involved?
Go ahead. Piggyback them.
Just, I have grandchildren, nieces, nephews who are gay and lesbian, and the church just isn't talking about it. We just keep quiet about it, and maybe they'll go away if we don't talk about it. We need to talk about it.
Go ahead. I'm gonna take your questions, and then I'm gonna pull it all together somehow.
A
Go ahead.
comment on the theology of the body. I'm a medical oncologist, hematologist, and also looking at the biochemistry of the body.
Yep.
And I think this is an area where we need to do a lot more looking, a lot more understanding. We are finding that the XY chromosome is not as simple as what we thought it was.
Thank you.
We're also finding that the biochemistry has multiple different ways of determining our sexual orientation, our sexual understanding, but we're just in the very early stages of starting to understand that. It needs a lot more study, a lot more understanding, a lot more conversation, but it really magnifies this idea of the theology of the body. We really need to look at the biochemistry of the body.
Yep. Yes. Tony, did you want to get in before, anybody else want to get in before I, yep, both of you, go ahead.
I just quickly wanted to know if your students are comfortable speaking to I was just wondering if your students are comfortable saying that they are gay or transgender in the classroom. Are they comfortable with that?
Do you want to hop on and I'm going to pull this all together?
Well, I think I'm a priest. I think it's time you people start teaching in your own homes, in your own grandchildren. You have a lot of grandchildren. There's some wonderful books out. Well, I mean, the encyclicals, the letters that the Pope is writing. Buy a few of them. My sister Adeline, some of you know Sister Adeline Kroll, Franciscan. She and I, we put together an easy way to do it in your home. It's called bingo. Instead of using numbers, we use ideas from Joy of the Gospel and Amoris Laetitia and the one of the environment. And you play it with your family. You give them a prize for every time. But while they're looking for it on the board, you explain what it's all about. It's so much fun. Do it in your own family. Invite your neighbors over. It doesn't cost very much, and you'll get a lot of joy out of it. And if you want to learn more about it, see me during lunch.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's great to hear voices. I'm going to say two things, I think. There might be a third. First, my students do feel comfortable saying many things. I'm teaching my first transgender student this semester. So that is a reality St. Ben's and St. John's are needing to confront. My students feel comfortable because I have chosen to make my classroom such. I cannot say that across the board in college education that happens, even in high school or whatnot. I choose that for a whole host of reasons, which would be another like self-help theology day, right? But my path in life has been, I'll just say interesting, right? And I will just say, post my mother raising me, she made a very poor choice under duress to marry my second father, who was very abusive to us, committed suicide when I was a freshman in college. And I have to tell you, I pretty much left the church after that, but I was at Holy Cross with the Jesuits. The Jesuits brought me back. My roommate in college was the first female to ever come out publicly at Holy Cross as a lesbian. That was in 1994. I actually had never heard the words gay or lesbian before. I didn't know what the hell it meant. But the second she came out, the hate I experienced, despite the fact that I had a boyfriend and was considered like safe and heterosexual, was transformative for me. And so at the end of the day, I am choosing to have one foot in and one foot out. I will admit to you, I absolutely struggle going to Mass. I don't get a lot out of it. My kids are in Catholic school. I got to give them something. There's no way I'm throwing them out in the secular world with nothing. I see what's out there. I've got to give them something. I can have those conversations of negotiating things with them. But what I would love all of you to walk away with from today, and these theology days is understanding that you are the church. And when I asked you, had any of you heard of Amoris? And there's hardly any hands. I need you to go back to your parishes and start doing what Tony is suggesting, right? It's starting in your family, but it cannot be a one-way relationship between the priest and the people in the pews. You have got to go back and ask for the conversations. You might be turned down. I actually don't know, right? But if you're turned down, you must go back and ask again, right? Because I will say this, the job of a parish priest is a very difficult job. It's too many jobs for one person, actually. So what I would like you to do is extend an olive branch and ask your parish for programs. You have every right to ask for that. You have every right to ask for the continuing education. And here's what I want you to realize. You don't need a PhD to do this. You just need a willingness to listen to somebody who's hurting and to be that witness that you're a witness to Christ and you're going to listen. And you're going to do what was in the New Testament, the arguing and the conversations, right? Where did Jesus go? Not to the safe places, right? Not to the cool places. Jesus went to the trenches. So go back to your parishes and go to the trenches with each other, knowing you're going to disagree, but also knowing that something else holds you together, your belief in Jesus, right? And assist that priest and those people who are running the show at your parish in saying, I've got an idea, here's what we're going to do. Let's get this book group going. I picked up this book from Theology Day, let's read it together. You don't need a PhD to read those books out there. I was very deliberate, right? Go and read them yourself, start the book clubs, start the conversations, right? Start the conversations because this is what's happening. This is what's happening over the past 50 years with the ideas of marriage and family, right? There is a lot of non-reception. And the non-reception is not because I think you are trying to say, the hell with all of this. What you're screaming is, listen to the challenge that I have. Be empathetic towards me as to what's happening in my life when I think about the social pressures that we're under, when I think about the conflict we're having in our family, when I think about the economic pressures of work-life balance, when we think about the abuse that's happening, all kinds of abuse, when we think about gender roles, when we think about the obstacles on the ground, such as disease and addiction, right? When we think about loneliness, when we think of end-of-life issues, and we could also say beginning-of-life issues, right? When we think about the nuclear family model, when we think about migration and war, right? I think we as a church are saying the issue of non-reception is there not because we want to leave the church, but because we need further dialogue about these challenges and these obstacles, right? And certainly I think the idea of non-reception when it comes to marriage and family, it got a bad rap post Humanae Vitae. I mean, Humanae Vitae became the litmus test, right? It became the litmus test for marriage and family in local parishes. And it did not need to become that, right? And there's ways in which it became that, and you can see the snowball effect, right? And instead of confronting the non-reception and having the really hard conversations we need to have with each other, we're pretty much at a standstill, right? And I think we're all coming here together because we're begging actually to move beyond the non-reception, and we're begging to be engaged in the conversation, right? So what do I think? Here's some things. One way Lisa Cahill will put this idea of non-reception is that we've got the church, we've got the officially sanctioned voices of the church, the hierarchy, and we've got a lot of people on the margins. On the margins for a whole host of reasons. They feel on the margins, they feel excluded, and many people have been led to believe, I think, over the past 50 years, if you're on the margins, that must mean you're not receiving the teaching, blah, 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 and that's not what it means at all for many people. It means they feel on the margins, they do not feel like their voices have been heard, they are struggling to put the pieces together at the local level and move forward on what that might mean. And when we did the divorce and annulment theology day last spring, I mean, the amount of people that had went years without the Eucharist is wrong. The Eucharist should have been used to bring us back into the fold and to figure things out and to help us, as you so wisely said, ditch the ego, ditch the pride, right? That's what the Eucharist is there to help you with, right? If you're not getting it, the message of secular society can come in, right? And that, to me, that's the frustrating part. Why would we choose the message of secular society over the Eucharist? We got to bring people back, right, to what it means, and we have to have those hard conversations. So, what does Cahill suggest? We must become a church that witnesses neighborly empathy, not righteous judgment. So what would it mean and what would it look like to demonstrate at a local level neighborly empathy? We need to talk about things like showing mercy. We need to be highly concerned with not the sexual act, but the act of justice in our local communities. We need to remember the act of penance and forgiveness. We need to hold on to hope. And for Cahill, all of this, the hope, forgiveness, justice, and mercy, is because we believe in the resurrection, right? I mean, there's your theology of neighborly empathy, right? Approaching somebody with mercy, understanding the struggles at a social justice level. And that means acting because there's work to be done at the social justice level in our communities. Holding ourselves in a manner that lets people know that when transgressions have happened, when mistakes have been made, the hammer's not coming down. The olive branch of forgiveness and reconciliation is coming across the table, not the hammer, not the closed door, right? Not the shame, not the alienation, but help me understand. Let's help you process your mistake. Let's help you learn and choose a different path the next time, right? Whatever that might mean, right? Let's do this from a position of hope. Let's do it from a position of joy, right? Let's do this because we believe in the resurrection, not because we're sitting at the empty tomb, right? And that's the final story, right? More specifically, Cahill will talk about compassion, and understanding. It is severely lacking when it comes to marriage and family, right? An acceptance of those who have, quote unquote, broken the rules. What does that mean to have these tough conversations with each other, right? And here's the thing, I don't want to paint this in an idealistic manner. I mean, we might come to a roadblock on many issues. But what frustrates me as a moral theologian, we're not even having the knockdown, drag-out arguments with each other. Could we get to the point where we have the conversations with each other? Could we get to the point where we have the controversial dialogue with each other? And then go and celebrate Eucharist together, even though we highly disagree with each other, right? Because honestly, I think, who the hell do we think we are, right? At the end of the day, right? How could I think that my position is so right that I don't need the Eucharist, right? That's not the way it works, right? For equity, Cahill talks fiercely in this essay about the realistic application of doctrine. Again, this is hard. This is not about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. There is a vision of marriage and family that is wonderful and beautiful. It's the same thing I did with the divorce and annulment talk. There is a vision of the sacrament of marriage that is beautiful. And at the same time, we have to hold that up. We have to hold it up against the realities and the challenges and the struggles. And what we need to do is help each other through the realities and the struggles instead of saying, you didn't follow the rule, out. Right? We have to ask, why are you having that struggle? Why are you having that challenge? What needs to happen? Go ahead.
I look around here and I realize that we're all in an era. I look around here and I realize we're all in an era where officially sanctioned voices is what so many of us have lived with. So we have to overcome that if we're going to be more compassionate, more understanding, and more accepting. And I don't know, with the officially sanctioned voices that are giving negative comments regarding Pope Francis, if we are making progress. And we can talk all we want, but if these official voices are saying the church has been here for 2,000 years, and we have not changed, and we shouldn't change because we're still 2,000 years behind. So it's very frustrating. We can talk all we want, but we're not going to get anywhere because of the officially sanctioned voices.
Okay, but you are. Do you know why you're going to get there? Well, first of all, you're here, right? You're here. So kudos, right? But first of all, I totally hear you, even though I don't have the knowledge you have and the experience, right? But when I'm in my 111 class with my first years, right? And I was just doing this yesterday. We're getting ready to jump into the New Testament, and like, this is going to be good. This is the Gospel of Luke. Here we come, right? And they're kind of like, lady, you are crazy, right? And I said to them, you know, I need you to understand what's at stake here. When this guy walks in and says, I'm God, right? And everything that you just said about the weight of these officially sanctioned voices, right? It's true. There's no denying it. But the reason I said you're going to get there is because when those apostles said, he is the Jewish Messiah, they didn't stop talking. And they talked to one person and one person and one person and one person. And you're actually here today because those people did not listen to the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the priests. And they were persecuted because of it. Rome persecuted people that were walking around saying, this Jesus person is the Jewish Messiah. The Jewish community persecuted themselves because they wrestled so much. We are the 2018 Jewish community persecuting ourselves, struggling and wrestling with these issues. But you are here today, not persecuting each other. And I'm asking you to go back to your local communities. I know, that seems like you're sending me before the Sanhedrin Council, lady, right? Like, are you out of your mind? Yes, I'm out of my mind because I'm not giving up hope in the resurrection, right? Do I think you're going to get turned down? Sure. Do I care? No. That's probably, I'm from Boston, so I mean, no, I'm a little bit rebellious. But I want you to, you're right, the officially sanctioned voices are loud, heavy, weighted. But you know, technically you outnumber them, right? I mean, technically, right? And you have to leave here and do something. Even if you're turned down and the door is shut in your face. You can't give in to the narrative that the officially sanctioned voices are the only voices that are allowed to speak. Well, forget it. No, you're right. You are right. Right, but see, you've got this rebellious side. You came to this. You trusted a non-priest moral theologian to talk to you today, right? Like, you are rebelling. I kind of like it, right? Like, come on, you're giving me credit. I'm going to go here and then I'll get you. Like, you are doing it. You actually are. But you're right. You were taught to be quiet.
In my generation. Right.
Right.
I don't want to be quiet anymore. My niece in the cities, when they have a problem with their children and they don't know quite how to handle it, she can contact a counselor. Now, why isn't St. Ben's or St. John's, with all this community of sisters and priests, setting up some kind of a line that we can call in and ask questions there?
There you go. Sisters, rock on. There you go. New job. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But you said the magic word when you said your husband is there to help you.
Oh, let's talk about the gender roles. Yeah.
Okay? Our job was to raise our children, and the husband went out to
And you
work.
did a damn good job at it. Right? Yes, but say the next piece because I'm going to say something else. And our husband's job
was to go out and make a living.
And he lost out big time on what it meant to be a father because that's a screwed up role of masculinity.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, you're okay. It helps to walk around.
I was just thinking about if we think we have to do things totally individually, there's where we feel kind of isolated. And my wife Vicki and I, and I'm fortunate to have a partner that, we certainly have our great discussions. I call them discussions and not arguments, along with your terminology. And we've even had to look at, in this case, Vicki comes from a great Lutheran background. So when we talk about the church, I think of the church, in this case, as the Christian church, and not even limited to that. But to make a long story short, get into the community, the communal part of things. And I'm just so excited about all of this can be transferred from the family to community with the beautiful sisters here. And I'm appreciative of the priests that are here, many of whom are setting the tone that we hope their brother priests also allow the parish I'm at right now. Father Ron Rywans was there, and Father Elf continues that. So we've had to kind of change parishes at times in order to get that support that my voice, our voice, can be heard.
The question that I heard was, how do you do things at the local level? So I just want to give one example. One of the people at our church arranged for a study group of one of Francis's encyclical. She didn't operate through the priest. The priest is not necessarily the head. All she had to do was get it into the parish bulletin that in her home they were going to have a discussion of the encyclical. Everything worked out fine, and one of the people there who came was perfectly willing to talk in front of the group about how she was a lesbian. So, you know, on the local level, you do not have to go through the priest.
What's your name? That's a great example, right? I mean, you don't. You're right. Get it into the parish bulletin. That was like, yes. Yeah, whoever is in control of that parish bulletin actually controls a lot, right? I mean, seriously, right? Whoever knows where the tables are and the keys are, those are the powerful people in a church, actually, right? Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
I'm going to return to a comment that was made over here by this gentleman talking about individual versus the group. Yeah. And I think really that's what's going on with Francis in a big way. We're used to being, here are the rules, this is our interpretation of what Jesus meant and how we should live and how so on. And now I think Francis is returning us to a conscience-based model where you have to make some of these decisions on your own.
Absolutely.
He's saying. However, when I look at this, and I think that's great and good and so on, I mean, in a lot of ways, because there's a lot of gray area where, and we do want to show compassion and understanding and so on. However, where do we get to a point where, in college I had a friend who's Presbyterian, and she would say, you know, what I don't like about the Presbyterian Church is we never know where we stand. They refuse to take stands on certain issues. She goes, at least you as a Catholic knows where your church stands on these issues. And she goes, and I admire that. I like that because you have kind of a set of principles that you can live, and you can answer questions based on these principles. So if we go to this conscience-based issue, it's good, and it's also not just scary, but it undermines us as a group in a way. So I'm just wrestling with that issue. For example, this comes to mind, what brought this up in my mind is I have relatives who really don't believe in the church at all. You know, they were raised Catholic, 13 years of Catholic education. They mock the church. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, not just neutral, but mock it.
Right.
And yet, they're in control when they go to church. They go to communion. They do whatever they feel like doing because they don't care about the church enough to even think that they have to be careful when it comes to taking the Eucharist. So I, as a practicing Catholic, have to watch this. You know, have to say, hey, you know, I don't think that's really a good idea. You can't have it both ways. Right. If you don't believe in the church, why are you going to communion? So their acceptance of people who have broken the rules, I really feel that is breaking the rules. That's really hard for a practicing Catholic to watch. And then what do we do about something like that?
I think you've hit the nail on the head that this is scary, right? It's scary because I think we've known for a long time we disagree about things. And we have not disagreed lightly, we haven't done so out of spite, right? I mean, we've just really struggled, right? You're absolutely right that so much of Francis's keeping it open style, I think that's in Amoris, is because Francis wants the conversations to be had on the ground between the person and the priest, right? I mean, it's kind of hard to go case by case, right? Because you're right, you run the risk of, well, what exactly do you believe in, right? I think so I'm trying to say two things at once, and it's hard for me. When you were talking, I thought, yeah, we have got to get over our fear of this being messy. It already is messy, right? So, I mean, let's just talk about the messiness, right? Like, I think if we talked about it, maybe we would not come to resolutions, but every voice deserves to be heard, right? I mean, that's justice, that's equity, right? And I mean, Francis's year of mercy was meant to get us, I think, to halt throwing daggers at each other, right? I mean, I truly believe that if you're not in somebody's shoes, you actually have no idea what the person's going through, right? So we kind of have to halt throwing the daggers at each other, even though I frankly think the church has trained us well to throw daggers at each other, right? But I was thinking, like, you know, for the longest time we thought slavery was okay too, and we're really at a crossroads of how do we wrestle with the doctrine of marriage and family and the realities of the challenges that present itself on the ground, right? I mean, and here's, I don't know if I'm making sense, but part of the reason why I want to argue with John Paul, because I 100% believe with every fiber in my being that he is with me right here, right? And I want to say to him, I really like what I do. Like, I think I'm doing God's work. The problem is, in Familiaris Consortio, you told me my number one job was being a mother. As I have grown in maturity and my role as a mother, I actually understand that, right? Because what I have said about myself now when I introduce myself is that I say I'm a mother. It's a very powerful experience for me. But I'm living, like, I want to argue with John Paul that I want to be a mother and a theologian. And I want the socioeconomic order to let me do it, right? And so I need you to not just talk about it's my job to be a mother. I need you to help my partner understand what it means to be a father and let him help me, because he's just important. Like, I'm not the person I am if I don't have Ben helping me do it all, right? And so I think I'm frustrated with how the church described things, because I'm like, you've got these simple gender roles outlined. And you know damn well, John Paul, that's not how it's working on the ground. But I'm still doing the marriage and family thing, right? Like, I am still called to the sacrament and to the vision of marriage. But I mean, can't you see there might be another way to do this? Right? Like, that's the wrestling and the conversations that I want to have, right? So take whatever issue you want to insert there, right? I would do gender roles. I would do work, family, vocation, right? Let's wrestle with what the configurations look like on the ground, right? Let's make sure I am tending to my role as a mother. My husband's tending to his role as a father. Let's make sure we're not getting caught up in toxic masculinity models. Let's make sure we're not, let's really dialogue along the way through the stages of life of what the configurations, plural, families might actually need to look like. Let's keep talking about the messiness.
I have been blessed to be able to work with Somalis in our community, and a lot of what we are talking about here has come to me in watching them go through their faith, their Muslim faith, and especially working with the women who were mothers in Somalia and came here with their children and are trying to preserve that culture and everything they believed. And I had a young Somali man go with me, knocking on doors, talking to the Somalis. And he said, "Do you have a lot of children?" And I said, "Well, I have 4 boys. I think that's a lot." And he said, "But we have very large children, families." And I said, "You know, the people here in St. Joe have large families." But that was historic. And I said, somewhere along the line, I remember hearing on the media that we had to knock down the numbers. And quite frankly, to this day, I question whether I should have listened to the media. I am for life. I would not discontinue life because of my lifestyle. But the people in America have really listened to that message that came from the media, from the government, from outside sources. We still have some that have had large families, but the majority of them have not. Now I am seeing the younger Somalis marrying, realizing they have to get their education finished. Now they have roles in society, and they are limiting the number of children, which is totally different from the way their mothers were brought up in their faith. We do change, but I think this whole notion of being open to life, of being open to listening to people, and allowing them to have a different position. I have a friend who is a staunch role in her party, and I grew up believing I was in a certain party. But because of things that have happened, I realize it is more important to hear her reasons why. And I don't use party lines anymore because they have divided us. And I think this is why it's so important for us to listen to each other and to accept the fact that we have different ideas.
You know, this all comes to a needed understanding. You teach moral theology. The church teaches certain eternal verities. And we go back to the Greek philosophers. What is the good man and all of these things. I am a Catholic. I believe the creed. That is what guides me. I have certain relationships. I have a lot of gay friends, as it turns out. I'm from California, one would expect. And I really looked at and struggled with those relationships, I mean, years and years ago. I have a friend who is a very powerful and successful attorney. He's been with his partner for almost 30 years. You know, fidelity. I have a woman friend, Helen, who they're approaching 60 years. Can you imagine being a gay female couple in South Carolina 60 years ago? And yet they stayed together. You know, and I have, you know, other examples. Then the Pope comes along and says, who am I to judge? But I beat him at it because I know these guys and these women, and I know what I believe, that this is not what our church teaches. But it's not my place to condemn them. But in my church, it is my place to teach that this is not something that we believe in, that marriage is between a man and a woman. That's my Catholic teaching. But that doesn't go over and say, Stephen, you're going to hell. I don't know that. I'm not God, which is one of the great joys of being human, because I don't have to make those decisions. But we're here and we hear you. You're a moral theologian. And we learn. And some of the things that you say, some of the people are going to disagree with. Others are going to say, oh, yeah. Or she's not rigid enough. But we really have to judge each person. I have a friend who wanted to go to communion. We were away from here. And he hasn't been to church in 50 years. And I was going to go to church in a casino because they have 2 masses every Sunday in this casino. And he said, well, what do you think if I went to communion? And I really struggled with that in that conversation. And I finally came and I turned to him and I said, you're a Catholic. You know what this is. You have to make that decision. I cannot make it for you. And I think we have to be open to other people. And I guess that's really my point. We need to be open to others and not condemn them for what they do or who they are. But we have to live our own life with our church. And that's what's important to me.
And I think what Francis does so nicely in Amoris is say, you know, we don't want to lose what the Eucharist is. What we want to do for your friend is remind your friend of what the Eucharist is meant to do. You know, and I think you're right. You've got to put it back on the person to make the decision. And that's the opening. Here's the opening to remember what it can do. It's not perfect, right? It's not a perfect process. But maybe you could remember the good that was here, you know? And then start to think about how can you retrieve the good in the midst of the chaos. Somebody has their... Oh, go ahead, Molly.
Yep. Just thinking a little bit about the population you work with, 20s, 30s, even some 40-year-olds. You know, we have apostolic exhortations, we have encyclicals, we have synods, and I think sometimes they're just like, screw that. Like, it doesn't speak to me, you know? And I just wonder, how can we make it user-friendly, you know, more user-friendly? Because there's really good stuff in those documents and in those things. But, you know, to say let's have a, you know, I mean, I suppose you could do Theology Untapped with, you know, with this, but I just think, how can we unpack it a little bit better and be more real to that generation? Because I think we're losing them because it's not, right. You know, if they're not feeling, they feel judged when they walk into church, you know, and there's other ways we can approach them, but yeah, so.
Well, I'll ask this, how many people know that there's a synod going on right now? Okay, good job, right? And I mean, of course, right, it's on young people, and I mean, what they're trying to do is hashtag it and all that stuff and get people involved. I kind of guarantee you that if I went into maybe Totino Grace High School, I'm not quite sure anybody's talking about it, right? I'm also not quite sure, we haven't mentioned anything about it. That's a failure on my part. So there is a lot, there's a lot going on, you know. You're right, we have to, I think Francis is really trying, but I'm a firm believer the local church experience needs to look different. You know, and when I say different, I don't mean throw everything out, right? I mean really use that building, that grounds area, use the whole entire area every single night, because it can be a place in which people gather and wrestle intellectually. You know, I mean, why drive by a church and have it be empty Monday through Friday? And I'm not saying every church is like that, but why? Why? First of all, there's a building, there's space, you know, build the playgrounds. Oh my God, build a gaga pit and you'll have young kids coming, right? Build a gaga pit and do something. It's this new game where they play in this pit and it's with a ball and they like love it, you know? But I guess the whole point is, let's start doing things to draw people to that building, to that space, to that sacred area, so that the area remains sacred and the area becomes the new training ground for open dialogue, communication, tradition. I mean, what would that look like, right? What would it look like? And you know, I think back to your writing. I can't remember your name. You know, and also Vincent, I'm thinking your comment about like, what is fidelity? What is commitment? We have to have hard conversations about the sacrament, right? Again, some of us might come away from those hard conversations saying, this is the sacrament, this is the way it looks. But let's have these conversations also of what it might mean for you, right? But I really do hear that for most of you, you were just told over and over again the rules, right? And you were told to be quiet, and you were told to be reverent, and you were told it's a one-way street. Francis's encyclical is here to say it's not just a one-way street, right? It is a two-way street, and that matters, right? There is joy in marriage and family, in love, and there are also challenges, right? What would part 2 look like if you had to talk about the challenges, right? And then you would need a part 3 going forward, right? What does part 3 look like, right? I found something interesting that I'd like to show you. So Lennar in Maple Grove, they're a home builder. Here's what I found on their website, right? You could build a multi-generational floor plan, right? What would expanded versions of family look like, right? When you were talking, Diane, we're not only up against our on-the-ground challenges, we're up against consumer society that we are all a part of, right? We are up against a model of the American dream that tells you to go build your house in the suburbs, put a fence around your backyard, and separate yourself from your neighbors and do your own thing. I would give anything for my children to experience just hearing a bell, and that means they have to come home. I am exhausted as a parent planning these stupid play dates. Because there's not a single soul in my neighborhood that has all these kids in it running around wild. It is exhausting being a parent planning play dates. Things have really gone awry. And the reality is, there's a park up the street from us, and I can tell you there's no way in hell I'm sending my kids to it. So that is so painful for me right now that I cannot say without a ton of trepidation and fear, get out of the house, get on your bike, and go up to the park and play whatever you want to play for the next 3 hours, right? But I mean, there's a lot at stake here. I mean, what is this American dream? Secular society's American dream of the family. We're not operating in a silo here. We are up against the challenges of secular society, right? And part of the reason I kind of went crazy on you, I'm sorry, is because about 3 months ago, my husband, in 2016, my husband was wiped out as a middle manager, and after 20 years had to start over, right? That was crazy, right? Neither one of us knew how to do it. And 3 months ago, I said to him, are you happy in your new job? Like, what are you thinking? And he's a contract worker at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minneapolis. So he's a contract worker, and his contract is up in August. I feel like August is here on my doorstep, and I'm petrified, right? Because the government, the federal government, moves at their own pace. They're not moving at my pace. They haven't gotten my memos to hire him and make that all happen. So this is like weighing on me, right? And I said to Ben, what do you want to do? And he says, well, I really do like this job, blah, 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 blah. And he said, and there was this pause. And my husband's an introvert, and I said, what is it? What are you thinking? And he said, well, you know, I'm not making what I made before as a manager. And I said, yeah, keep going. And I really watched my 47-year-old husband struggle with, he has been told his whole entire life that he is supposed to bring home the bacon and he is supposed to do everything, right? So I actually have a lot of sympathy for white men who were told they were supposed to do everything, right? That's not to say we don't have huge racism, classism issues. We do, right? But I looked at Ben and I said, well, what do you want to do? Go back on Indeed, LinkedIn, all these stupid technology things. And he looked at me and he said, well, do you want me to make more? And I said, no, I'm fine with where we are. I said, we just need to tell the kids that, like, mom and dad have jobs that, like, so-and-so down the street. They all have different jobs than us, and we don't make what all the neighbors make, and that's just life, right? So there's one iPad that's shared in the house versus 5, right? And Ben looked at me and he said, well, if it's okay with you, I really want to try to get this job because it enables me to leave at 5:30 and get home and coach the kids. And if I try to go and get that big gun job, I'm going to be traveling again and I'm going to be gone. So what do you want to do? And I said, Ben, I can't imagine you not busting through the door, grabbing your peanut butter and jelly sandwich and going out with the kids and coaching. But I even watch him wrestle with that decision as to who he was told to be in our family, right? And who I was told to be. So when we think about gender roles, we've got to include everybody. It's not just women screaming, I want to go to work, right? It's my husband saying, are we okay not making what we made before? And now I can be home to be the father that I want to be. And you got to process that together, right? But let me just tell you, my students are not hearing that process message, right? They are in debt. They don't know how to achieve this American dream. And maybe we have to ask ourselves, besides just dealing with the church's vision of marriage and family, what the hell is the secular society's vision of the American dream, right? Is it credit card debt so that you can keep up with the Joneses and participate in consumer society? Like, these are the things we have to wrestle with in marriage and family, right? So, Francis, write part 2, write the struggles that we are facing as believers, as disciples in consumer society. It is no different than sitting there in the early Jewish community, looking at Rome and looking at the Roman pagan practices and saying, what are we going to do? How are we going to handle all of this, right? Because we got this other way of doing things out there. We're Christians. What does it mean? We're all doing that together, right? And what we need to do is we need to get better at having these conversations with each other. Not just about church doctrine, but what does it mean to live in consumer society today? What are our goals? What are our hopes? What are our visions for marriage and family, right? Because our young kids think they've got to go and make money. And they need something else to hold on to. We know that, right? We all in this room know they need something else. But it also means we've got to change higher ed. Because they're going to higher ed and they're in debt and they're running credit card debt up, and it's hurting all of us. So wow, that's a lot to handle, because we've got our own issues with the church. We've got the caravan that's coming. It is coming whether we like it or not. They're fleeing violence. What does that mean? Does it mean walls? Does it mean dialogue? What does that mean? And in our own families, as we struggle to retire, as we struggle to have a living, have a life, be happy, be joy-filled, what does that mean when we hear the messages about the American dream? This is the best church ever. So I just want to end by saying thank you. Like, thank you, thank you. It's great to see some familiar faces. I really thought for sure after marriage and the annulment, or the divorce and annulment one, I didn't think anybody would come back, right? But thank you for wrestling with me on this. Like I said, there's a really good book out there, Julie Rubio's book, Reading Amoris Laetitia, a study guide. I'm also going to give a plug for 2 very interesting books. One is a little bit more theoretical. It's my colleague, David McCarthy, who teaches at Mount St. Mary in Emmitsburg, Maryland. It's called Sex and Love in the Home. I mean, if you want a good, deep philosophical read, grab that. If you want a more powerful, practical read, grab Julie Rubio's Family Ethics. It takes you through, it's a very similar style as to what I do, taking you through the ideals and really asking how does it work on the ground, so on and so forth. I hope that you can come away at least saying, like, wow, there is a very particular vision of marriage and family for the past 50 years, right? The family and the concept of marriage is really held out as this social transformative force. I hope you can remember that at the same time that the pain and the struggle and the hurt that can be associated with marriage and family is real. And I hope that you will go back to your parishes and say, what should we do, right? Because as Dr. Joseph said, you don't need anybody's permission to start reading this stuff. You don't need to be a theologian. You just have to be you with your faith and a willingness to dialogue. So thank you so much for your time this morning. I really appreciate it.